Hello everybody. Over the last 10 years, the classic car world has gone absolutely bananas for old 911s, particularly anything with a GT badge on it, where 10 years ago you'd struggle to get 20 or 30 grand, now they command more than they did when they were new. But amongst all of these iconic cars is one curious exception. This, the 996 generation 911 GT2. At the time of its launch, the most expensive 911 you could buy. Also, the fastest and most powerful. And yet today, it commands scarcely more than the originally much cheaper GT3. Why is that? Well, it might have a little something to do with this car's nickname, the Widowmaker. You see, here we have a car that makes 460 horsepower from an old-school turbocharged engine and has more torque than a McLaren 12C, but no traction control. So it should be interesting then, shouldn't it? Wish me luck. Today really is a very, very special moment for me, because way back when, in the early 2000s, when this car was new, Porsche had a configurator. And at this point in time, online car configurators were a fairly unusual thing. I don't really know of any other manufacturer that had one. And I spent far too much time on it. But every time I went on there to specify a car, it would be a GT2, because when you're 14, you always go for the most expensive, the fastest, and the most powerful. If you don't, there's probably something wrong with you. But in the real world, not many people ever did tick that box. In fact, back then, not that many people went for a GT3 either. All in, just under 1,300 996 GT2s were ever produced, in a period spanning from around 2002 until approximately 2005-2006. And the easiest way to explain to somebody what a GT2 is effectively as a GT3, but with turbos. And in a lot of ways, that's what it is. Developed by the same motorsport bods over at Porsche, and in theory for motorsport regulations. Though I believe as time went on, Porsche sort of gave up on the GT2 category and instead focused on GT3s. That may be one reason why, as time went by, it is the GT3 that became their primary focus, to the point that, for several generations of the 911, there has been no GT2. And in fact, there hasn't been a car to wear the GT2 badge without an RS on it for quite some time now. There has not in fact been one since the 997. You could actually make an argument that it was in fact the GT3 badge which was the new one, because for the old 993 generation there was a GT2, or at least an equivalent. In its day, it was badged simply as the 911 GT. Only later did we call it the GT2. And this again is a very similar thing. So what we have here is a car that in theory is a very close relative of the 996 Turbo S. It has functionally the same 3.6 litre flat 6 twin turbo engine, only with the larger X50 turbochargers as shared with the S and available as an option on the regular turbo. It also came with uprated cooling, a stronger 6-speed manual gearbox, and some other goodies that you got with that car. It makes here marginally more power. In the early cars, 460 horses and 457 pounds-feet of torque. That's 620 newton meters. It sends all of that then to the rear wheels, because these did away with the all-wheel drive system that came standard on the regular turbo. But because this was a car that came from a different time, all you had helping you deploy that power to the rear wheels was the judicious use of your right foot, a limited slip differential, and a pair of 315 section wide Michelin Pilot Sport tyres. That's it. There is no traction control, no stability control, and that is likely where this car got its nickname, the Widowmaker, from. Because anybody and everybody I know that has experienced one of these has told me it's a fairly wild thing. And this is actually not my first experience in a GT2. It is my first time in this seat, but the last was equally as memorable, because I got to passenger around Watkins Glen in New York, the former Formula One circuit, with a rather talented wheelman in a car that had slicks on it. And that, honestly, altered my perception of what an old car was capable of. Today, I'm likely not to get anywhere near close to what that car was doing, but I hope still to be able to put my foot down enough to really experience what it is that this car has to offer. And conveniently, today's review comes very close after my drive of the 996.1 generation GT3. And as it happens, this car's owner, Andy, first got in touch to offer me his 996.2 GT3. But he also mentioned in that he had a GT2, and as somebody else had already offered me their .2 GT3, I said, you know what, just by chance, are you about tomorrow afternoon? Because the sun is out and I've got a bit of time. I'd love to try your GT2. And here I am, risking life and limb for your entertainment. So, if you're enjoying today's video, or you have enjoyed any of my others, please make sure to hit that like button, because I suspect my life insurance policy is just about to go up. But all jokes aside, what actually is this car like to drive? Well, you may be sat there watching it and thinking, James, that neither looks nor sounds particularly visceral. And from this seat, I'd actually have to agree with you. This car, mercifully, is mechanically entirely standard. It also looks absolutely stunning. Andy, very sensibly I think, deliberately went for a car that wasn't in silver, black or red, and he wanted something as close to standard as he could get, and preferably without the carbon fibre interior that many of them have. I actually have a bit of a soft spot for that. I think it's quite cool and something that marks out the higher end cars. This from in here, bucket seats aside, doesn't really feel any different to any other 996. And these actually are a retrofit too. They are correct for a GT2, but they would have been fitted to a GT2 Club Sport. This is a comfort car, so did without the cage, fire extinguisher and everything else. I am though very happy about these seats being in it, because they're amazing. They're nicely supportive, they're also very comfortable, and this does feel like a car where you could do reasonable mileage. Now, despite the fact that the car doesn't have the front-wheel drive setup installed, it still has the same size boot as you would get in a turbo, so it's an alright size. This one clearly still has the space saver spare in it. Many people now just get rid of that, give yourself that much more boot space at the bottom, and well, just stick a can of squirty cream in the back. What then used to be the rear seats then functions as the rest of your storage for this, and to be honest, you know what, it's as practical as just about any other 911, which is to say, for certain circumstances very, and others not at all. Though I am somewhat terrified about that front splitter. Watching the car come along for the drive-bys earlier, it seemed to get perilously close to the ground, and I couldn't even imagine taking this car into a multi-storey car park. That is one area where, sadly, it's not really any more practical than a Ferrari of the day. The first thing that you actually notice when you get in this is just how ludicrously heavy the clutch is. I mean, I've driven a lot of cars now, and I would say this is not far off Countach heavy. It shocked me, it really, really did. It probably didn't help that I hopped straight into this out of a 718 Cayman GT4, which, like many modern day cars, does have a clutch pedal, but it's very light. I suspect maybe, Anorak's helped me out here, that perhaps in pursuit of weight saving or something else, Porsche got rid of the clutch servo, which would give you some assistance and make it lighter, something they fitted even in a 993 turbo. This car does, though, still have a stereo for what little good it will do you, and air conditioning, which I'm very happy to say is working quite well. It is 30 degrees out there today, but a nice chilly 17 in here. The ride then, as you might expect it, is definitely on the firm side. It is bordering crashy, and it is definitely a little less compliant than in the 718 GT4. The steering though, ooh, even at low speeds, that is classic old school 911 delicious. Certainly has a little more weighting and arguably a little less feel in it than the GT3, but that's logical because this is a wider car with bigger tyres. Up front, they're 235s. However, when doing my research for the specifications of this car, there is one number that really impressed me, and that's the weight figure. You see, a 911 GT3 of the day would have been some 1,430 kilos, again, depending on specification. One of these is only about 20 kilos heavier. And when you consider all of the extra stuff that it's got to contain to make and deal with that power, that's amazing. They really put some serious effort into this. Also gotta say, that rear wing, that to me is iconic. Not quite so sure how I feel about the front bumper, which looks a little awkward to my eyes, a little bit aftermarket. But the whole thing in this colour, oh, it's got a purpose about it that I really like. Although it still looks ludicrously narrow on a modern road compared to any current day, not just supercar, but 911. It looks really svelte. Very cute, this thing. And hopefully that's going to give me a little bit of help in a moment. Well, I got a wave out of a Porsche owner. Yes! To give you some context for just how impressive this weight saving actually is, compared to a 996 Turbo S, which features many of the same mechanical components, this is some 150 kilos lighter. That's mad. That gearbox is absolutely glorious, real rifle bolt precision about it. Not all 996 boxes are actually that nice. You can, even at low speeds, rev match too. The engine doesn't quite have that mad keenness to rev as you would find in a naturally aspirated Metzger, but it's still very, very happy, very easy to drive at low speeds, doesn't chunter or shunt too much. It's really actually quite pleasant. Unsurprisingly, visibility here is exactly the same as it would be in a 996 Turbo, which is to say, excellent. You've got a nice view of those 911 haunches out the front, but more impressively to the side, because it doesn't have the enormous B-pillar you get with many modern cars, you've got a real panoramic view of the road. It's fantastic, this. And honestly, one of the things that I kind of love about this car now is that if you were to take that badge off the back and remove the center caps from the wheels, I wager very few people, including a number of petrol heads, would actually know exactly what this is. But I suppose, of course, in a lot of ways, that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because if you're going to go and spend a lot of money on something special, you want to be reminded that you've bought something special. And as we've already established that nobody's going to stop and look at it in a car park and go, oh my God, do you know what that is? All it really has left is the way that it drives. So, let's see how she does. So, 20 years after I first spec'd my childhood dream 911, what does it feel like to drive? It's tricky, I'll be honest, for a number of reasons. And I think the biggest issue that I've got right now is this car's reputation. I have been told by so many people that this demands massive respect. There is a very good chance I'm giving it maybe more than it deserves. Yet, even in the small little bit I've been able to sample so far, it reminds me of that scene in The Princess Bride where Wesley is recounting the story of how he made it away from the dread pirate Roberts. And every evening he goes to bed and is told, "Good night, Wesley, sleep well, I'll likely kill you in the morning." And that's what every corner in this car feels like. You get through it, you have a good time, the steering talks to you, it communicates nicely, and then it says, "Did you enjoy that? Good. I might kill you on the next one. But it hasn't thus far. So, shall I push my luck a bit more? I shall. I think I understand the car perfectly now. And what it actually reminds me of, give me a moment here, is my girlfriend's mother. You see, my girlfriend and I, we got talking a long time before we actually met. And so before she introduced me to her family, she warned me about her mother. And she said, oh, I don't know, you know, be careful, my mum, you know, she's quite serious, you know, she could be a bit vicious. And I sort of said, oh, okay, all right. Fine, okay. So when I finally met the mother, she took me aside and calmly said to me, if you upset or hurt my daughter, I will hunt you down like a dog and kill you. And I said, yeah, that's perfectly acceptable. I think it's very, very reasonable. And ever since, we have gotten on absolutely famously. And this car is exactly the same. It is no nonsense. You cannot take liberties with it, but provided you treat it with respect, it will be very nice back to you. Yes, it's got a lot of power, but actually, by modern standards, not masses. In pure straight line terms, yeah, it's brisk, but it's not savage. I don't think it really feels that much quicker than the Cayman GT4 that I've just gotten out of. I'm sure it is, but it just doesn't feel it. Now, part of that is because the Cayman makes power at 2,000 RPM, and this doesn't really make it until about 4,000 RPM. A function, I think, of having those bigger race-derived turbos. The steering also is beautifully communicative. I said earlier it's maybe not quite as good as the GT3, and that is true, but it's 90% at least as good as the GT3, and that was already an excellent system. It is also a little slower than many modern supercars and even modern 911s, has a lovely weighting about it, and the whole thing feels really very well put together. The suspension too, once you start pressing on, really does work, and actually compared to many modern GT3s, it's actually quite comfortable. The clutch does still take some getting used to, and I will confess that when I turned it around, I stalled it for the second time today. Don't think I've stalled another car this year, but hey ho, the owner did tell me that he does it as well, so I feel a little bit less bad about it. But I can see what the issue is. You see, it does still have quite a bit of power and torque, and when you're in a bend, that rear end, it's moving a fair bit, and if you were to go over a particularly lumpy or demanding piece of tarmac and it kicked the thing out sideways and you were still on the power, I could see you having a very bad day indeed. You'd have to be lucky, a very committed and skilled driver, or a combination of both to survive something like that in this. But it is also a car that is in such a constant dialogue with you that provided you've got your eyes on the road and you're paying attention, this is a situation that hopefully you should be able to avoid. And I happen to suspect, because it is running its standard exhaust and everything else, and it's a turbo, when you watch me doing those driving segments, you probably don't think I'm really giving the car much stick at all. Certainly nowhere near close to what I was giving the GT3. The fact is, I just don't have to give this as much stick as the GT3 to make the same progress. Off boost, it does still have something. I mean, it's still a 3.6 litre after all, but it of course doesn't have the response of the naturally aspirated unit. And I think on road, the GT3 is still where my heart would lie. And evidently, a lot of others felt the same way. Oh, the lesser spotted JPS Seat, as you do. here's the thing, the GT2 is one of those cars that's so rare and so rarely spoken of, it's very easy to forget that it exists full stop. And when Andy got in touch and offered me his car, I thought, crikey, a GT2. I mean, I nearly, I say nearly, I doubt it, convinced my mum to buy one about 15 years ago when she had her 993 Targa and a 996 C4. Combined, if we'd sold those, we would have had nearly enough money to buy a GT2. There was one up for sale, I think at 911 Virgin, for £48,000. Not that long after, they were then £100,000 cars, and then at that point I stopped looking because I honestly started getting a little bit depressed about the whole thing. And so I figured that today, with GT3 prices being mad as they are, these would now be £200,000 cars. But they're not. There aren't masses of them for sale, of course. I believe about a dozen currently in Great Britain, but prices range anywhere from £90,000 to about £120,000. And that kind of shocked me. The truth is, that is the money that would also get you into a 996 GT3 RS, a 997 GT3, a 991.1 GT3, a whole host of other turbos as well, including 991, and that would be a much quicker and easier car and better to live with than everything else compared with this. But this is quite special, it is quite rare. It is also rather nice to drive. And this is one of those cars that I think would be really nice to buy as a proper petrol head, because a lot of other Porsches, 911s and all that, I have an hour behind the seat and I feel like I've sort of got the best from it. I've got most of what it has to give, or most of certainly what you're ever going to ask in a road situation. However, with this, I feel like you buy one of these and it's the beginning of a long-term relationship. You're going to be able to develop your skills with this car. You're going to learn to work with it, understand what it likes, what it wants, what it needs. And that to me is quite an exciting proposition. If it were 12 degrees out there, or damp, I doubt I'd have asked Andy to come out today. But as it's not, I'm really enjoying this car. That's second gear, that's foot flat. Planted. He has put new tyres on it, and for that I'm very grateful. One thing I want to tell you about this car though, is that if you're looking at it thinking, you know, that's a great way to have something faster than a Ferrari for less, no. The previous owner spent, are you ready, £35,000 on this car in maintenance, some of which was granted maintenance of the more cosmetic variety, making sure that the bits you can't see still looked good, and other stuff then was just general ordinary maintenance. These are tricky cars to work on. They are old now, and the ones that have sat around for a long time, which includes a lot of the GT2s, might be hiding some rather large issues. And they might start out as fairly small issues, or you might be told, oh, a turbo needs a rebuild, but then you find out how difficult things are to get to, then you start taking things apart, and then you find other things that previously you couldn't see that, well, actually now you're there and you know about it, you really should sort, and before you know it, 15 grand has gone. You know what, today I was really looking forward to. I did though worry that it was going to be either terrifying or just underwhelming. And I'm very happy to report it hasn't been either. But I will say, I will confess, I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of the 996 GT2. But anyway, I want to say a massive thank you to Andy for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have something you'd like to see featured on the channel, do send me an email. The address is in the description of every video. It is talk@jayemm.com. So for now, all that remains to be said is bye-bye. See you for the next one.